Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of our Travel Talk series. I am Nirja Bhatt, a content and project executive with Trip 101, and I'm very happy to welcome you guys back to another episode in our amazing series about traveling to different places. So through this series, we try to give you guys detailed information about a lot of different types of questions that you may have about accommodations, foods, and so on. And we talk to different area experts, tour guides, people who have extensively traveled the world to give you the best of information and the most updated one as well. So today we will be traveling all the way to Europe, a magical destination which is known for its rich culture, art, food, and so many other things. And our tour guide for today would be Agnethe. So she will take us through all the nitty-gritty details of Copenhagen. And she has 10 years of experience under her belt, so we are in good hands. Before we get started about all the details, let's talk to Agnethe and let's just ask her to introduce why she got into tour guiding.
Hello everyone. Wonderful to be here. My name is, the Danish version of it is Agnethe. That might confuse you with the way it's spelled. And don't worry about it. It's what I always tell people because Danish is notoriously a very tricky language to learn. No one in Denmark expects travelers to actually be able to speak Danish or even get our names correctly. We just smile. So don't worry. I'm a native to Denmark, hence the weird name. I'm actually a native to Copenhagen, which very few people can say. I got into tour guiding 10 years ago. I have a background in Danish literature and history. I've always been a history nerd. So tour guiding was the perfect job to explore that interest and share the love of my city. I've lived here all my life. So I know pretty much everything there is to know. And here we are 10 years later, still doing it because I love it so much.
I'm glad that worked out for you. So before we get into more details, can you tell me a bit about Copenhagen and why do you love that city so much?
I think Copenhagen is the perfect mixture of a big city. It has a capital city feel to it, but it's also quite small. On a worldwide scale, it's really one of the smallest capitals in the world. It only has 500,000 people. So I think to some of that's very small. To a Danish person, that's the big city. So we have people from the countryside, they come to Copenhagen, they say, oh, wow, it's so big. Where do I go? How do I find my way? But I really like, as a resident of Copenhagen, how it has a very laid back feel. It's beautiful. I chose a famous Nyhavn district, which is famous all over the world for its beautiful setting with a canal, old wooden ships, and colorful historic houses. But that's just one part of Copenhagen. And generally, Copenhagen has this kind of cozy feel to it, but you still have the comfort of a modern capital city, great public transport. You have a wide variety of dining options, but still the locals are pretty laid back, and we have a sort of more relaxed attitude to how we live our life. So it doesn't come with the stress that a lot of big cities do, but there is still the opportunities and the excitement that you would generally feel in big cities, at least around Europe. So it's a very interesting mix of casual and things of interest.
That's amazing. That's good to know. When I think of Copenhagen, I think of perpetual October vibes, like the autumn vibes where it's all cozy, orange,
Yeah.
and fun. I like that you say it's cozy because I can relate even though I've never been there.
Yeah.
Let's get into our main topic today. Before we get to the exciting parts about the food and attractions, let's get the logistics out of the way. How far is the city center from the airport, and what's the easiest way to get there?
One of my favorite things about Copenhagen, as someone who loves to travel myself, I realize I'm spoiled for living in Copenhagen because no matter where I go in the world, I always think, oh, why does it take so long to get to the airport? Copenhagen has the benefit of being a small city, but we still have our own airport. And due to the very modern, very good public transport, it's easy to get back and forth from the airport. Of course, there'll be taxis outside of the airport just waiting to pick up travelers. It's actually very easy to catch a taxi once you exit the terminal. They're right there. So that's a very easy option for the people who feel, okay, you have a lot of luggage with you or you're jet lagged. You just want to get to your accommodation as soon as possible. It's easy to catch a taxi. Otherwise, the airport's very well connected to the city, especially the city center, with public transport. So they're both
Okay.
trains that go approximately every 20 minutes that will take you directly to a few stops on the way, will take you to Central Station in around 20 minutes. And then there's also a metro. And the metro is fantastic because that can take you almost anywhere in the city, and it's super fast and convenient. And there you just wait 3 minutes for the next metro. So there are all these options. You need to buy a ticket for public transport, but Denmark is accommodating to travelers. All the ticket machines will also have the option for an English version. And if you feel yourself completely confused, you're standing in the front of the ticket machine, you don't know. Normally it tells you which ticket to buy if you go to city center. So the machines are very organized that way. Usually you can catch someone who looks, there's always Danes coming back and forth from the airport too. And we're usually pretty happy to help. If we see someone who looks completely lost and they ask you very politely, can you please, how do I go here?
Yeah.
You can just say that in English and people will understand. But it's actually very easy to find out. And I rarely see people confused when I'm traveling myself. It takes 20 minutes to half an hour to get to the city from the airport, no matter what time you arrive.
Right. Yeah, it sounds very convenient. Just to
Yeah.
dig a little into that, what's the most affordable way?
Public transport, by far. Taxis are pricey. Public transport is almost as easy as a taxi and the most affordable. It costs, I think, 30 or 40 kroners for 5-6 euros from the airport, depending on where you need to go in city center, just for a per person ticket. It's the most affordable option.
Okay, good. And just to ask this question, because a lot of places they have maybe tourism pass or transportation seasonal passes. Is that something that's available in Copenhagen as well for public transport? Any travel passes or cards?
Yes, they do. And that's where you have to be a little careful. The tourist offices advertise the Copenhagen card. And I always tell people on my tours that's a tourist trap. It's not if you really like to see a lot of attractions in a very short time. I would say go on a museum or attraction marathon. It pays because you get public transport included, but it's more geared towards attractions and visiting a lot of attractions in short time, more than most people would want to do. Then there's another travel pass, not well advertised, that's called Copenhagen City Pass. And you can buy that from the ticket machines. You can also buy it digitally because Copenhagen a very digitalized city. So there's these travel apps and they're starting to advertise them more. Of course, it depends on whether you have data when you arrive, but that's actually a very convenient way to buy travel passes because, again, you can buy them in English too. The one normally used is the DOT, and that's where you can buy both regular single tickets and you can buy the day pass or multiple day pass called Copenhagen City Pass. And Copenhagen City Pass comes in a small version, small pass that covers the entire city. If you're staying in Copenhagen, buy that. And it covers all the city, and the minimum is 24 hours. If you want to stay for multiple days in Copenhagen and you're visiting wider areas, for example, if you want to see the famous so-called Hamlet's Castle, which is quite far north of Copenhagen, but in what we call Greater Copenhagen region. It's not Copenhagen, the city, but it's in the wider area. That's 45, 50 minutes from Copenhagen by train. You can buy the large Copenhagen pass, and then it covers a wide kind of circle around Copenhagen. It's of course more expensive. So I would say ideally you want to figure out where you want to go, how far you want to go out of the city before you arrive, just so you're not wasting your money. But you can use that for all public transports, the Copenhagen City Pass. And our public transport today is quite a lot. It's both the so-called regional trains, which goes to outside of Copenhagen, for example, up to Hamlet's Castle or official name Kronborg Castle. But you can take the city train, which are the red trains with an S on them. They go within the city and suburbs. And then the metro. For most people, the metro is pretty much all you need. It will cover no matter where you need to go in Copenhagen. We also have buses and public ferries. If you explore Copenhagen Harbor, the city pass works for public ferries, which is very practical because in the public ferry, you can't, it's actually hard to buy a ticket on location. The Copenhagen City Pass is something I recommend.
Okay, perfect. That was a lot to take in because I understand that Copenhagen is a very well-developed traveling
Yeah.
system. So you did mention an attraction, Hemlet's Castle, which is, as you said, outside of Copenhagen a little bit. So
Yep.
around the city, are there any other good places that people can visit if they just don't want to be confined to one city?
Yeah. Oh, around Copenhagen or in Copenhagen?
Let's do around for now. We'll get into the
Let's
end
around
later.
Copenhagen, yes. So there's lots of things, and that's usually what I recommend if you are 3 days or more in Copenhagen.
Yeah.
I recommend going out of the city a bit. 2 days in Copenhagen will cover all your needs, and it might be stressful to go somewhere else. So one of the top attractions, as I mentioned before, it's nicknamed Hamlet's Castle, but the actual name is Kronborg Castle. And that's one of my favorite places. That's actually a place I would want to live myself if I was living in Copenhagen, because the city is so lovely. It's quite small. It has around 50,000 people in the entire city. So it's not even in the top 5 largest cities in Denmark. But it also gives this really cozy feel. It has very beautiful historic houses dating back over 400 years, older than most houses in Copenhagen. The castle itself is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It has a very fascinating history. Plus, it was what inspired Shakespeare to write Hamlet. It has a fantastic view. You can visit Sweden from there. You can take the ferry across to Sweden. So you can see 2 cities in a day if you want, because the ferry takes like 20 minutes. It's super close. You can see the beautiful South Swedish city of Helsingborg as well. Normally just staying in Helsingør, how we say in Danish. Elsinore in English makes it easier for you guys to say. Helsingør, besides the castle, has the Maritime Museum of Copenhagen. If you like maritime history, sailor stories, or want to explore part of Denmark's history, that's a cool place to go. You can also visit it from the outside on the way to the castle, because it's a beautiful piece of modern architecture. It's actually one of Denmark's most famous contemporary architects, Bjarke Ingels, who made the museum. It's quite new. And then take a stroll around the town. You can visit the cathedral. It's quite beautiful and free to visit. And then it can actually be combined with another major Danish attraction. So if you take the train up to Elsinore, you can make a stop on the way, or when you're coming back from Elsinore to Copenhagen, because on the very same train line, we have the small town of Humlebæk. And Humlebæk in itself is cute, but not a top attraction. It has one of the most famous art museums in Northern Europe, Louisiana Museum of Modern Art. It's a world famous museum for modern and contemporary art. It's all 20th century and 21st century art. The architecture is unique, made by 2 Danish architects, but they took a lot of international inspiration. And the museum is located in an absolutely beautiful little nature spot near the Baltic Sea. If you have lunch or coffee in the museum cafe, also something I recommend because the food's really good there. You have an amazing view of the Baltic Sea. So that's a fantastic attraction as well. I take lots of people there and they love it. Another thing to see north of Copenhagen is we have lots of castles in Denmark. We've been a kingdom with a monarchy, still an existing monarchy, for at least 1100 years. We have castles all over the country, but the best ones are near Copenhagen. Another castle worth visiting besides Kronborg Castle is Frederiksborg. Frederiksborg is one of the most beautiful Renaissance castles in the Nordic countries. It's from the early 17th century, built by one of Denmark's most famous kings, King Christian IV. Ask any Dane, they will know who he is. He's very famous for the Danes. Frederiksborg is a fantastic location. If you only have time for one castle, pick that one over Hamlet's Castle, over Kronborg, even though that's more famous, just because it's so beautiful. It has a fantastic interior with paintings and furniture and artifacts from Middle Ages and up until the 19th century. So it's walking through Danish royal history when you walk through the rooms. The Palace Chapel has deep historic significance for the Danish royal family and for Denmark, but it's also absolutely fantastic decorated. Also, if you come in spring, summer, early autumn, the park is really worth a visit. It's a beautiful mixture of very romantic English gardening style, something you might see in a Jane Austen movie, and a park inspired by the larger Royal Park in Versailles. It was inspired by the park at Versailles. We had bushes and trees cut into specific shapes. It's a beautiful location. Another top recommendation. The fourth must-see location is Roskilde, one of our truly old cities. It's actually a true Viking city. Copenhagen is not, unfortunately, but Roskilde existed in the Viking Age. That was probably when it was established. And it's a great place to dive into Denmark's Viking history. That's become very popular recently. A lot of people have watched TV shows about the Norsemen from way back. Denmark is part of that history, and we have the Roskilde Viking Museum, which very well preserved remnants of 5 Viking ships from 1,000 years ago. Fun fact, in summer, you can do a boat trip on Viking ships. Rebuilt replicas, they made replicas of the Viking ships from scratch. A word of warning, if that's something you want to do, it takes a whole hour and you have to row the boat. If other adventurous, that's you could go on a Viking boat like the Vikings. You have to row like the Vikings did.
Like the most authentic experience.
If you go to Roskilde, besides the Viking Museum, go to Roskilde Cathedral. Both the Viking Ship Museum and the Roskilde Cathedral are UNESCO World Heritage. The cathedral, it was built in the 13th century. It has architecture from the last 800 years because they've kept adding to it. It's a beautiful example of a medieval Danish church, which you don't find in Copenhagen. Unfortunately, churches in Copenhagen are not that old. So it has beautiful interior with church frescoes, and it's completely different from medieval churches in mainland Europe. That's actually something that people often get surprised about, how different it is. It's a very Nordic style, very Danish style to it. And it's also famous for being the main royal mausoleum, the main royal burial site from the last over 400 years. Technically, they buried royals there for the last 1,000 years, but since late 1500, late 16th century, it has been the burial spot for Danish kings and queens, and it still is. It's a tradition that's still ongoing. There's a lot of history and family drama connected to that. The church does a good job of kind of explaining that. So that's a must-see if you want to Roskilde. And then you can stroll around in the lovely little town. It's also quite small. And you can take the train from Copenhagen. It takes only half an hour, very convenient.
Lots of amazing attractions. The way you're saying it, I can imagine in my head, and I really want to be there right now. Specifically the Vikings. I'm fascinated with the culture. All right.
Yeah. A lot of people are there.
I have 2 more questions about logistics. I know a lot of tourists like to drive themselves around city. Is that possible in Copenhagen, and do they require any specific licenses or any other documentation? Can visitors or tourists rent a car in Copenhagen?
Oh, yes. It's fairly easy. I have to say, because I'm a local, I don't have first-hand experience because most of Copenhagen's residents don't own a car, and I'm very typical in that aspect. We have several car rental services, and a lot of it's digital now, so it's very easy. So there are international companies like Europcar, which has pickups from the airport. So if you rent a car, I would say get it from the airport because then you have it right away. That would be the easiest thing. There's a local company popular here in Denmark because it's so convenient. It's called Go More. And that has multiple locations where you can pick up, and their website and their app makes it very easy to rent a car based on the date, the time, the pickup spot, how long you need it for. It also offers ride shares, which at least among Europeans have become very popular. So that's probably one company I would check out personally if that's what you want. Now, word of advice, Copenhagen's not a very car-friendly city. So renting cars is more if you want to go outside of Copenhagen. And if you want to visit places outside of Copenhagen, that's a bit off the beaten track or quite far away, maybe do a road trip across Denmark, go for it. There's a lot to see in Denmark. and things aren't far from each other. So it's actually very easy to get around once you have a car. We have the same traffic rules as mainland Europe with speed limits, but there will be signs. Copenhagen is not very car friendly because there's a lot of streets that are blocked for car traffic or one-way streets and limited parking, and it can be hard to find a parking spot. So be aware of that. Don't expect that you can just easily drive around Copenhagen. I see every summer people, even Danish tourists, who come from other parts of the country, and they go to city center and they get lost because they don't know where to go. And that can be very frustrating. And so in Copenhagen, it might be easier just to use your own 2 feet or use public transport. Taxis can be very easily found, and we can get more into later how you get that, and maybe leave the car for other adventures.
Okay. In case they do decide to rent a car, do they need any documentation like international driving license?
Yes. If you don't have a Danish driver's license, it should be enough if you're from an English-speaking country. And if so, your driver's license is in English. That's usually good enough. But if your driver's license is not in English or Danish, then you do need an international driver's license.
Okay. I've also heard that and rather seen that Denmark is a cycling-friendly country. Is that something that tourists can rent as well?
Yes, it's quite easy to rent bicycles. There are many bike rental shops around the city. So this is where Google is your friend. But also there is one company I recommend, and I have used myself because my bike breaks down when I need it most. The company is Donkey Republic. They have distinct orange bikes, and their app is user-friendly. They're not expensive. There are other bike rental companies like Lime. I haven't tried them because they use electrical bikes. And electrical bikes, I don't really recommend in Copenhagen unless you have leg problems. It's a more convenient regular bike. And most locals 90% of locals will use regular bikes. So to blend in, use a regular one. Copenhagen is very flat, so it's convenient to bike. A warning though, because yes, biking, it's become an attraction for travelers to bike in Copenhagen because Copenhagen is one of the most bike-friendly cities in the world. Us and Amsterdam, the infrastructure is really designed for cycling. But the rules for cycling is very structured in Denmark. It's actually very strict. And because all us locals bike everywhere all year round, we bike very fast. It can be stressful to bike in Copenhagen if you don't know the rules and if you don't know where you should go. I hear this from people. If you're not used to biking in a big city, it can be stressful. It could even be dangerous if you're not careful, and especially if you bike in rush hour from Monday to Friday, so when everyone's going to work or coming back from work. So I don't necessarily recommend people biking unless they know what they're doing and they feel comfortable, just because it's not always as nice an experience as people think it is.
Yeah. Or Instagram shows it to be.
Yes, Instagram shows a nice picture, but the truth is a little different. So be mindful before you pick that option.
That was a great tip and great word of warning and useful to anybody traveling to the city. All right. One last question. You mentioned apps. So speaking of apps, are there any car ride sharing apps?
Yeah, so GoMore is for general ride sharing in Denmark, but we have equivalent of Uber as well in Denmark. We don't have Uber at the moment, so if your Uber app will not work, we have a Danish equivalent called Vigo. Viggo. It works like Uber, very user friendly. You get better service from drivers than regular taxis. If you know the name of where you're going, but you don't know how to say it, you can put it in the app. Just like Uber, if you go to a country, you don't know the language, it saves you the hassle. And I personally used Vigo and had good experiences with the drivers. The taxi drivers are okay, but they're not the most service-minded in Copenhagen. Good drivers are better. Plus, you know exactly what your ride is going to cost you. It will tell you in the app. Whereas the taxi use meter. And taxi drivers sometimes take the long way around if they know they go with travelers. So you don't get scammed with Vigo. Taxi drivers, it's only in a few cases you get scammed, but it's still not the nicest experience.
So now we have logistics out of the way. Let's dive into the attractions in Copenhagen now.
Yep.
So before we get started, I know there are lots of religious places around the city. So are there any specific dress codes that visitors need to observe when going to these places?
Really, it would be frowned upon if you go into a church in a bikini,
Of course.
but Danish weather wouldn't encourage that anyway because it's not that warm. People dress normally. There isn't really any dress code. It's customary in churches to, like, I think most religious buildings, or if you have a hat on or your sunglasses, it's nice to take that off. It's a sign of respect. No one's going to be mad if you don't. Relax, but there's not really a dress code. It's customary, though, in religious buildings that you keep your voices down, especially the churches in Copenhagen receive a lot of visitors. So just to make it a nice experience for everyone and to show respect, keep your voice down inside a church or religious building.
Okay, let's talk about attractions now, something I'm personally very excited about. Are there any attractions that both tourists and locals love to visit in Copenhagen?
Yes, I would say the main attractions are very popular among Danes. Let's take the big famous one first, Tivoli Gardens, as it's known in English. We locals just call it Tivoli, which is Copenhagen's amusement park. And very popular among visitors, but Danes come as well. It's insanely popular among both Copenhageners, especially families with children, but people from all age groups go. People from the rest of Denmark usually come every couple of years. The kids will pester them for it. The Tivoli is an amusement park and one of the oldest amusement parks in the world. It dates back to the middle of the 19th century and even has one of the world's oldest existing roller coasters, which
Wow.
is actually one of my favorite rides when I go there. It's also a place where they have concerts throughout the year and seasonal markets. They just finished their Halloween market, which they
Wow.
always have in mid to late October, and their Christmas market is opening soon. The Christmas market
Mhm.
is, if you come in December, it's a really cool place to go. It's really beautiful, very beautifully decorated. It's on the pricey side because you pay quite a lot for the entry
Mhm.
to Tivoli. They really know what to charge, and then there aren't so many rides open. So it's mostly you go around and you buy something to eat and drink, like local Christmas delicacies,
Mhm.
and shop for local arts and crafts. So local, it's a good place to buy Christmas presents actually, or just buy something locally made. It's very beautiful to see the park in the Christmas with decorations.
Mhm.
Otherwise, it's a summer attraction. If you go outside, there's late spring and summer, early autumn, and it's not Halloween or Christmas. It's
Yeah.
actually closed. So if you come in January, that will be
Mhm.
closed. But in summer, it's great fun for the whole family. If you don't bring kids and you don't enjoy a ride yourself, and you're only in Copenhagen for a few days, you might want to think twice about visiting Tivoli simply because there's so many other attractions and
Yeah.
it's very much geared towards families with children. Not to say that you shouldn't go without children, but it's a lovely place, but there are many lovely places in Copenhagen. But for Danes, it's super popular.
Any other cool places that you can think of?
Yes, lots. We talked about castles outside of Copenhagen, and
Mhm.
there are a couple in Copenhagen as well. The ones I recommend are the ones in Christiansborg.
Mhm.
Christiansborg is not the home of the royal family. They don't live there, but it's their workplace. It's where they have
Yeah.
ceremonies, state banquets, and when the royal family's not using it,
Mhm.
you can visit it. That's quite an interesting place to go to see that. You can also visit the king's horses. They only work a couple of days a year. The rest of the time they're chilling. You can visit them, and you can also see it's a historic site as well that dates back to the Middle Ages. So you can go into ruins of former castles that used to be there underneath the current castle. My top recommendation for a Copenhagen castle, which is also very historic. If you go on a weekday outside summer, you might be surrounded by local school classes. It's called Rosenborg Castle. You need to pre-book to make sure you get tickets. Pretty much all other attractions in Denmark, you don't have to do that.
Mhm.
You can usually just buy tickets on location for most places.
Okay.
Um, Rosenborg, you have to pre-book because it's a very big attraction, but it's also a very small castle. So they limit the amount of people who can go in at any given time.
Right.
Rosenborg is another beautiful Renaissance castle from early 17th century. It's actually built in the same time period as Frederiksborg by the same king. Rosenborg is one of the most well-preserved castles in Denmark. It's still standing, built in the 17th century.
Oh.
With a lot of the original interior, it has the crown jewels of Denmark. The crowns kings and queens used to wear, and the jewelry set the Queen of Denmark still wears on official occasion. So if you go one day and some of it's missing, it's because she's wearing it. She doesn't do that very often, so you have a very high chance of seeing it. Don't worry about that. If you compare it to, it's our Tower of London, but compared to Tower of London, because they manage the crowds, you don't have to stand in line to see the crown jewels. As long as you get your ticket, you skip the line and go in. It can be crowded, but you can always see things. So that's one thing I think is very good about it. It's also surrounded by a beautiful public park called the King's Garden. So if you want to see where locals like to hang out on a sunny day, if you come on a sunny day, check out the King's Garden. You'll see lots of Danes basking in the sun, chilling and having fun. Another attraction close to Rosenborg, so you could do both the same day, is the National Art Gallery. If you like art, but you don't want to go to Louisiana or prefer a wider range of art, go to the National Art Gallery, or SMK as locals call it. MK has Danish art from several hundred years ago, promoted by the Danish kings, and up until contemporary art. So they have permanent collections and they also have temporary collections. The architecture of the building is an attraction of its own because it's actually from two buildings from two time periods that are united into one. And it looks a bit strange from the outside, but from the inside, it actually looks really cool the way that the old building and the new building are connected. The museum has paintings by some of the most famous Danish artists from especially 19th and early 20th century. And it's a beautiful building. So I would recommend that for the art lovers. Also has a beautiful park that you can visit while you're there if you like nature spots. If you like Danish history and really don't want to do a deep dive into that and want to stay in Copenhagen, the National Museum is a good place. There is a Viking exhibition at the National Museum. It's a temporary one, so it should be there for a couple of years. It's different from the Viking ship museums. Probably wouldn't do both unless you really love Vikings, but they both have something to offer. The National Museum has several time periods, so you can just basically pick what interests you most. Neolithic Danish history, Stone Age, Bronze Age, Iron Age. If we ever had anything to do with the Roman Empire, you can visit that. You can also go and see lots of artifacts from the Middle Ages. You can also learn about our relationship with our former colonies, how we tried to be a colonial empire and failed miserably. There's something about that as well. And so it has something for every level of historically interested people. And that one is close to Tivoli as well. Another art museum worth visiting in Copenhagen is the Carlsberg Glyptotek. As the name says, it has something to do with the Carlsberg Brewery. Is a famous brewery in Copenhagen. And they have a foundation that supports the arts. And the son of Carlsberg's founder actually created a whole art museum just behind Tivoli and filled it with his personal art collection, which was massive.
Wow.
So that can also be visited. It's not really Danish art because he was more into ancient Mediterranean art, Roman art, Greek art, Egyptian art. So that's one of the best Nordic collections in Northern Europe. And also French Impressionists. We have a lot of French travelers in Copenhagen. They go to that art museum because it has a very impressive collection of 19th century French artists. And the building is beautiful, especially the interior. For visitors, if you want to see something specifically Danish, it's the Design Museum. The Design Museum is about Danish interior design, Danish furniture design, which is now worldwide famous. So it takes you through the history, the origins of the design movement. That's still going very strong. And it's actually located in a neighborhood where there are still design shops with the classical Danish furniture design. So you can go on a little shopping spree, or if you can't bring home the furniture or it's a bit out of your price range because it's quite expensive furniture, you can go window shopping and just enjoy how beautiful it looks. So that's something I would recommend as well. We have some people who are very interested in Denmark's World War II connection. In Europe, World War II had a huge impact on the whole continent, and what happened in World War II is different in every country. I would say the Denmark's experience in World War II is quite interesting because it's quite unique. We came relatively unscattered out of World War II. There is a museum of Danish resistance close to the Design Museum where you experience what it was to live through World War II in Denmark. So it's an experience, it's a museum that's less focused on showing you a lot of artifacts. You walk around and get stories from local people living through the period. It's a small museum. It doesn't take that long to go through it, but it gives you a unique perspective.
Okay, great. Those are amazing recommendations. I've noticed that most cities have popular destinations and then well-protected hidden gems tourists don't really know about, but they definitely should. Is there anything like that in Copenhagen?
Yes, there's lots. So I would say it depends on interest because Copenhagen has something to offer for everyone.
Yep.
So there's something for the art lover, history buff, people who want to try fun rides with their kids. Design enthusiasts, architecture as well is very big here. We have some very cool modern architecture. For architecture lovers, try local neighborhoods. The North Harbour district is a newly developed district. It's actually still undergoing development. It's going to be a massive district, so they're not going to be done in the next 30 years. The first part is done and can be visited. You can go by bike. Going by bike there is quite nice. I recommend if you want a bike trip in Copenhagen, don't go in the city center, go to the more remote districts because the traffic will be less congested. You can also go by metro. There are 2 metro stations in the North Harbour district. The places of interest in the North Harbour district is wedged in between the 2 metro stations. So you don't have to walk far. If you don't want to walk much, combine it with public transport when see the neighborhood. You could take the ferry there. It has interesting modern architecture, and several of our biggest architecture firms have headquarters in that district. Wow. The cool thing to see out there is the fitness roof or condi roof. It's a parking lot. So it's a building with parking spots for the locals. But on top of the roof, there's an open door fitness area where there's fitness equipment. It's tied to the roof, so you can't remove it, but there's all these kind of machines that you can use, and you can take the stairs up. So if you're in your fitness routine, that will be part of your exercise, that you run up the stairs. You can take the elevator if you just want to see it. It's quite a fun place also for if you bring kids, because it functions a bit as a playground as well. And you have a great view of the neighborhood, and just it's quite cool to see. There are lots of really nice cafes and bakeries in close proximity to each other. And there's also a spot where you can swim in Copenhagen Harbor. This is a thing in Denmark and an attraction, although only for people who don't mind that the water is very cold. You can hang out with the locals there because that's what locals do on a sunny day in summertime. Some people do it all year round, but most in summer, of course. So there's a designated area where you can actually swim in the water, where they check the water quality to make sure that it's safe for you. It's a place to see where locals live. How do locals live in Copenhagen? Otherwise, the Vesterport district, just behind Central Station, is a really cool neighborhood. It's an old red light district and district for drug users, so it's still a little rough around the edges. It's not unsafe. Copenhagen is very safe, so don't be scared of going there. But in the evening, it still has some social problems. So you still see some prostitution and some homeless people. But it's also very gentrified. It's popular among locals for its bars and restaurants. The main attraction in Vesterport is the meat packing district. It is literally packed with nice restaurants and cafes and a couple bars where the locals like to go. It's a very vibrant district. and in food-wise, it has a lot to offer. It also generally has a nice vibe, so that's a place I would go. Otherwise, the Nørrebro district, also a really cool place. You ask locals, where would you want to live if you could live everywhere in Copenhagen? You ask that to a local, and they'd say Nørrebro or Vesterbro, especially if they're a bit on the younger side, because those are the really cool districts. They're a bit edgy, but edgy in Copenhagen means very safe.
Yeah.
We have low crime. It has a lot of interesting things happening in terms of food, in terms of new shops opening. I would recommend a visit to the local cemetery, the Assistenten Cemetery, which is quite easy to find because there's a metro station literally inside the cemetery.
Wow.
You can easily go there. You could bike there from city center. You could even walk there from city center if you want it. It's not that far. And the cemetery is a beautiful place, actually a place where people hang out. Maybe sounds creepy. We hang out around the
Sounds
tombs, but
unique.
people do that. And it's famous for having tombs of some of Denmark's most famous people. Of course, the world famous fairy writer Hans Christian Andersen. He's buried there. Around the cemetery, there are lots of cool little streets with cafes, bars, and also some shops with local design, especially vintage and recycled design make on recycled artifacts has become very popular. So there are a lot of little, it's a nice area to explore. The Nørrebro district is really big, so exploring around the cemetery, you see the really interesting parts.
Lots to do again.
Yeah.
You did mention some of the places which are kid friendly or amazing for families with kids. Besides the ones that you've already told me about, are there any other activities or attractions within Denmark that is suitable for families with young kids?
Yes, the big one outside of Copenhagen is Legoland, because Denmark is the home of Lego. Lego is at the other end of the country. You can go on a day trip. Travelers on my tours did that on their own, and I thought it was okay, but it depends on how wide attention span your kids have, how they tolerate long distance, because it's like at least 6 hours each way from Copenhagen. I wouldn't recommend it in a day. Legoland and the new Lego house in both are in Billund, which is where Lego's headquarters is. If you have multiple days in Denmark and bring kids, they will love it. Do it as an overnight trip, in my opinion, unless you really like to spend a long hour on either in a car, or you can take the train and bus. There are public transport options. In Copenhagen, we have cool attractions besides Tivoli. For the little bit older kids, I recommend the Experimentarium, which is a bit outside of Copenhagen, but still within reach. So you can take public transport there. It's pretty easy. I think there's a bus that goes there. The Experimentarium is a science center for kids. So it teaches kids about science through playing. So it's one massive playground. And even if your kids don't like science, I didn't like science when I was a kid, I still love to go. It's really kid friendly. Near Copenhagen Airport, we have the Blue Planet, the largest aquarium in Northern Europe. And that's also a very kid-friendly attraction, especially because they have special kids activities, like you can see them feeding the various animals. So they have everything from sharks to colorful tropical fish to even a local pair of very friendly otters. And it's located on the Baltic Sea. You can actually, on clear days, you can look over at the famous bridge that connects Copenhagen and the South Swedish city of Malmö. You can see that from the museum. So that's a kid-friendly attraction. A lot of museums and castles are trying to become kid-friendly. If you go to museums, especially castle museums like Rundborg or Frederiksborg or Kronborg, they have activities for children, like scavenger hunts. Roskilde Cathedral does that too. Louisiana even has a children's department where the children can discover their inner artist. So usually the main attraction combines something for adults and children, so it's for all age groups.
Perfect. Okay, speaking of age group, one last question on this. Copenhagen is a famous destination for senior citizens, and I know a lot of activities might not be very walking friendly, which some senior citizens might be looking for. So are there attractions suitable for senior citizens?
Yes, several museums are not
Mhm.
very large.
Yeah.
And if you go with a walker, or in some cases, if you're in a wheelchair, there are several of the museums that will accommodate that. So most places actually will accept the UNESCO World Heritage sites like Castle or Roskilde Cathedral because they're very old. So the
Mhm.
castles, the older won't have that option. But otherwise, a place like the Royal Reception Rooms in Christiansborg are friendly. You come in a wheelchair, you have to call them in, the staff in advance, and schedule to take the elevator. So that's a little bit of a bother, but they're very helpful. It's
Mhm.
definitely doable. And most of the churches in Copenhagen and the museums, they will have ramps for wheelchairs as well. And otherwise, because at least the city center is very small,
Mhm.
it doesn't actually require that much walking. In that sense, I would say it's senior friendly, and you can combine the metro with walking. Get a Copenhagen City Pass, take the metro line to do a little hop on, hop off, and you don't have to
Mhm.
walk so much. And you can just go up and see what's nice around here. And then you can take public transport further. And of course, you can also drive around in Copenhagen, but then in some cases, if you really have trouble walking, I recommend going on a bus tour or a tour with private car, which
Mhm.
is, for example, something I offer. One thing that could be considered senior friendly is a boat tour,
Mhm.
which is great fun and something I really recommend. As long as you are able to take the few steps down into the boat, so you've got to be mindful of that. But the bigger boat companies do have an actual staircase with a railing you can hold on to.
Mhm.
So even if you don't walk well, they can accommodate you, and it's not super steep. You can sit aboard and just enjoy going around on the boat and see lots of things. And they do 1 hour tour, and some companies do 2 hour tours as well. And Copenhagen from the waterfront is a beautiful experience.
That's great. Good to know. And one last question on attractions. A lot of people are adrenaline seeking. So are there any adventurous things that they can do in Copenhagen?
Yes and no, because Copenhagen is small and cute in a nutshell. But there are outdoor adventure activities you could do. So I wouldn't recommend biking because it's not very adventurous here. You go fast in traffic, actually go in rush hour in Copenhagen, then you will get your heart rate up, but maybe not in the way you anticipated. Then we say the biggest adventure thing you can do in Copenhagen is skiing or snowboarding
Wow.
or rock climbing. We have a building for those three things. It's a waste plant built by very famous Danish architect that has a skiing trail, a ski slope on the roof
Mhm.
for skis and snowboarding, and you can rent skis and snowboards
Mhm.
on location, and you can actually have the thrill of skiing down the top of a tall building at the outskirts of Copenhagen. So fantastic view while you do it, and you're in the middle of a city. And you can do it all year round, so
Mhm.
it's not limited to winter time. And that building also has a rock climbing trail, so you could also climb up to the top of this 85-meter tall building.
Mhm.
So that's also an option. Otherwise, well, you can do bungee jumping in Copenhagen as well. There's an old crane that services as a bungee jumping facility. That's something you need to pre-book that. Kayaking, well, less adrenaline, but kayaking is actually very popular in Copenhagen. Paddleboarding is also becoming very popular. So there are a lot of places that provide that way where you can rent that and just go around Copenhagen Harbor. Otherwise, I'd say you should. There's some places outside of Copenhagen as well that
Mhm.
does it. That has some more adventurous things to do, like the Forest Tower. You climb this tall wooden tower,
Mhm.
round tower, so you go around like in a spiral, and then that has a fantastic view. You will be in an old forest and have a fantastic view on top of the trees if you want to go climbing, because we don't have any mountains, so you can't go mountain climbing here. It's not
Right.
possible.
Okay, that was a great list of activities. Now we know what to do in Copenhagen. Let's talk about the different neighborhoods and places to stay within the city. Is there any neighborhood that stands out for its nightlife?
There is some nightlife in Copenhagen, but it's not really big, limited to a couple of streets in city center, Nørrebro and Vesterbro. A few clubs, but otherwise, our nightlife culture in Denmark is actually quite relaxed. It's mostly go out and have some drinks. So we have some good craft beer bars, and really good craft beer bars and cocktail bars. And there's also the nightlife. If you want to have Danish style nightlife, go to old school pubs and drink with locals. An experience if you want to see what it's like. Some clubs in city center, but we don't have a clubbing scene like they do in Berlin, for example. Venues like VEGA in Vesterbro, which has both a lot of regular concerts, and they also often have a club or after the concert on the weekend, but not every day, not every weekend. So that's something to look into. I would say Vesterbro is a good place to stay if you want some nightlife, because there are some nice bars there. But they're not so far from each other. Copenhagen is a small city.
On that topic, you also have questioned whether there's any particular neighborhoods which has a lot of good shopping options. We will dive deeper into this a little later, but just in general, if there are any neighborhoods.
Again, I would highlight the Vesterbro and the Nørrebro district. Nørrebro, close to the cemetery I mentioned before, has some really nice shops for more local design and artists, and also so arts and craftsmen by locals, and a bit of vintage too. So Nørrebro for that. And otherwise, I would say city center is where you have the most options. And Copenhagen is great for, well, Nordic fashion, which is very minimalistic, very sleek. We dress down, but we dress still quite nicely in Copenhagen. The clothes are not supposed to look expensive, but they are expensive, but also comfortable. The main shopping street in Copenhagen is in city center. We have a very long shopping street in the middle of the city that goes from City Hall and down to right before the Nyhavn district. And that has all the major Danish brands like Lego, Royal Copenhagen, which is very famous for Danish porcelain, and silverware from Georg Jensen. Also some design shops like Hey, which is it's more modern, affordable Danish interior design pieces. Rains is popular for rainwear. It's very practical and also still stylish and good quality. So you want a good rainproof bag. If you want to adapt the Copenhagen lifestyle of biking all year round, you can go and get your rain gear in Rains. Pandora, which a lot of people are not aware is Danish, the world's largest jewelry retailer. They have just opened a new large flagship store on that shopping street. And of course, there is the obligatory Lego store is there as well. Otherwise, I would recommend going around the side streets of city center, because there is a lot of nice little local shops if you go down the smaller streets. The smaller streets are everywhere in city center and fun to explore without just walk around and stumble across cool things. And you actually find a lot of really good design shops for Danish design. Local designers, you find them on the side streets and not the main street. There are a couple of department stores on or close to the big shopping streets. Very easy to find. They range from mid to very high-end products. You could, for example, buy local delicacies. If you want a little edible souvenirs to take home, you can get that easily in the department stores.
Wow, okay, all right. Another neighborhood question would be, are there any particular neighborhoods with the best food spots that should not miss
out? I would go to the local food markets to try that out. My personal favorite is called Torvehallerne. It's located in a city center, so it's a very convenient location for breakfast or lunch. Not a dinner spot because they close early. Some cafes open for dinner, but things die down around 6-7 p.m. Lunch is popular, and locals like to go there too. It's both farmers market and a place where you can buy groceries like butcher shops and seafood stores lots of cafes and street food stalls where you can buy food. And it's very international in terms of the food. It's Danish specialties, but mixed with food from different places around Europe and also a bit from outside of Europe as well. So it's a beautiful spot, and the quality of the food is generally very good. For those who like the street food experience, I would say go to Reffen. Reffen is a bit troublesome to get to unless you have a bike or feeling adventurous and want to try taking a bus. The train does not go out there. And it's a bit remote location, but it's a really cool spot. It's basically all street food stalls that are located inside old containers. So it has a very kind of cool look to it, and it has waterfront access. It also has one really good crappie bar in Copenhagen, and the crappie bar is in lots of places, but there's one out there from one of our most famous crappie brands, Mikkeller. Otherwise, there is a whole host of great dining options in Copenhagen. We have everything from 3-star Michelin restaurants. We're known for the highest number of Michelin star restaurants in the Northern European countries. We have world famous restaurants, the Noma restaurant, but it's closing down temporarily. So the next couple of years, you unfortunately can't visit Noma. But there's lots of other good restaurants as well. And they're all over. So I would say it depends on which restaurant you want to go to. Yeah. Some places you have to go a bit outside of the city. The food scene is a bit spread out. I would more say actually avoid to eat in the Nyhavn district. So even though the Nyhavn district is beautiful location, worth a visit, most of the food there is average. They cater for tourists, and the locals usually wouldn't go to eat there. I wouldn't go to eat there. And I always recommend people to go and eat where the locals are. There are lots of very nice bakeries and cafes, and the bakeries in city center are fantastic. You can't really go wrong with any of the bakeries. There are a few food items you should try, some from the bakeries. For example, a Danish pastry, which is a breakfast item. It's breakfast pastry for Danes, or you eat it with when you drink your afternoon coffee. You can get it in a lot of the local cafes. We also have a flourishing coffee culture. We are coffee addicts in Copenhagen, so it's easy to find lots of local coffee spots. I would just advise that you avoid Starbucks because their local options are better and cheaper. We have a Scandinavian version of Starbucks called Espresso House that I also think is really average and not really worth the price. So don't go there either, because also the baked goods will be bigger in the local places. For lunch, you should have the open face sandwich. Torvehallerne has good options for that, but there are also lots of restaurants that have really amazing options. One place I really recommend is the Royal Playhouse. It's actually close to Nyhavn, right at the harbour front. You can eat well in Nyhavn, you definitely can, but you have to go. You don't go in the colored houses, actually. One local place, you can actually see it in the picture. So if you look not on the side of me behind me with all the colored houses, but the other side, you can see it's in the shadow, and there's a little white boat in the picture. And actually, that's an amazing spot for open sandwich. It's a great lunch spot. The locals nominated it this year for one of the best spots to have traditional Danish lunch, which is a big thing here in Denmark, to have the open face sandwich, or as we call it, smørbrød. And that boat, the restaurant's called Judy, spelled Judie. And it's really good for food. But it's a small place, so book in advance. And generally for the good restaurants, book in advance. Especially if you're more than 2 people, you should plan ahead for your dining options, because a lot of people come to Copenhagen to experience the food scene. It can be tricky to find good places to eat. They sell out quickly in summertime. Off season, it's easier, but some places you really have to book far in advance if it's very famous.
All right, so we will talk about food a little bit later, but I wanted to know about accommodation. So is there any particular neighborhood that has really great Airbnbs, hotels, or resorts or such in Copenhagen?
So Airbnb, you have to check the individual provider because the quality can vary a lot. You can find great accommodation in the more remote neighborhoods where it's also probably a bit more affordable. For Airbnb, I'll look at individual ratings for the individual place. Usually Copenhagen apartments are quite nice in general. It depends on the host. But for hotels, city center has the best hotels. If you want one with a great view, I would say get hotels with the harbor view. The Admiral Hotel or the 71 Nyhavn are both great places for location and for the view if you get a room with an ocean view. And they're both historic buildings, so that can be pretty cool. Be aware if you are used to living in a place with air conditioning that they might not have it, because air conditioning is not really a thing, not just in Denmark, but in Europe in general. And the older buildings usually don't have it. Usually it's only 1 or 2 weeks a year in summer where you need an air conditioned room. But if you come at the wrong time, that can be an issue. So just be aware of that. The Villa Copenhagen is fantastic hotel, even have their own very good little bakery connected to it. So you don't have to go far for amazing Danish pastries. It's very centrally located, but near a congested traffic area. Shouldn't affect you when you're inside the room because of the sound isolation. But if you want to live somewhere more quiet, there's also lots of boutique hotels. Behind Central Station in the Vesterborg district, there's a lot of nice hotels that might be a little less pricey than the ones in city center. Depends a bit on the individual hotel and what time of year you book. Generally, I'll have to say that accommodation in Copenhagen is quite pricey. So the more budget accommodation, you should check out the hostels like Next Copenhagen or Steelhouse or Dan Hostel, where the location is pretty good. You are pretty central, even if you're not right in city center, you are still close. Nice locations. And usually they try to do a lot to make it fun to stay in those places as well. Some have individual rooms. You would have to book good time in advance for the budget accommodation because that can sell out quite quickly, and be aware that generally Copenhagen is not a cheap fit. So accommodation might be the biggest splash in your travel budget. Because Copenhagen is small and because we have good public transport, even if you're not living in a central location, it doesn't matter so much because it doesn't take that long to go around. And if you live outside city center, it might, and you want to explore the city by bike, that'll probably be nicer for you because city center it get crazy in terms of especially bike traffic. It can get very congested. But if you're feeling adventurous, you want to try the bike culture. If you're out staying outside city center, that can actually be a nice place to explore. And a lot of the hotels will, and hostels too, will have bike rental. So it's very convenient. But there's usually train stations or metro stations nearby. The South Harbour district can be a nice place to live if you want to really live where the locals live. But there aren't so many hotels. There's hotels like Cabin, Scandic, and Mosey that could be good options and are also a bit more affordable than the ones in city center. The hotel quality in Copenhagen is usually pretty good. You don't have to worry about safety. It's a very safe city. Some neighborhoods have more to offer in terms of city life, food, especially nightlife. The city center, Vesterbro and Nabo district are the most happening places. Christianshavn is nice if you want to live in a more relaxed, more quiet neighborhood, but close to city center and a historical location. There are some nice hotels in Christianshavn as well. And the neighborhood, I didn't mention it before, but it's also worth a visit if you are there. It looks a bit like the Nyhavn district, but it has fewer visitors. This is more quiet.
All right. So one last question about accommodation. Is there any particular place, a hotel or resort or whatever that you really like and that you'd want to recommend?
Yes, I would say, and I'm basing this off the experience of the travelers I have with me on my tours since I live here. I haven't actually stayed in a hotel. The Villa Copenhagen is one that people really love. And I always like to go there because it just has a cool vibe. The lobby is very beautiful. It's a historic building, the former postal office that they turned into a hotel.
Wow.
And it's good for if you want to go outside the city because it has the central train station next door, literally, and they also have a metro station nearby. And it has Tivoli right across. Otherwise, there are boutique hotels that are nice. We keep getting new hotels, so I'm still familiarizing myself. The Coco Hotel in Vesterport is pretty cool because you're really in the local district, and the hotel has a very nice vibe. There's also the Hotel Sanders. That's quite high budget hotel, but it's also a very nice hotel because it's very close to the Newham district. It's close to the Royal Palace. Everything of the major attractions, historical neighborhoods are in short walking distance. Plus, the hotel is known among locals for its great cocktail bar. You might find locals coming there just to sip a cocktail. As a fun backstory, it's a former ballet dancer from the Danish Royal Ballet who is the owner of the hotel. When he retired, he opened a hotel. The Royal Theatre with the Danish Ballet is right next door.
Very interesting place. So let's move on to my favorite section, food section. So what are the best local foods tourists have to try when they're in the city?
We have great food, but Copenhagen is known for the quality and the innovation of older local food traditions. We mostly have just a few items, types of food or dishes that I would say are must tries and are actually very easy to find. And one is the Danish pastry that I mentioned before, and you can go to any local bakery, and a lot of the hotels will serve it for breakfast. If you try it once, you might want more. And then you can easily find bakeries or little local cafes that have it. We have really world-class bakeries where you can indulge in some fantastic pastries. One that's become very popular recently because it was an American TV show is called Heart Bakery. And that is one place that is really amazing for the pastry and has some nice locations. I recommend the one Heart Bakery near the Opera House because then you also have a fantastic view while you enjoy a coffee and a pastry. The Danish pastry is, I often get the question, what is it? And also, well, it's lots of things. So there isn't just one pastry that you get. There are some varieties that are super popular right now among locals, so you can find them very easily everywhere, and that's also what the cafes will have. And that's the cinnamon bun and the cardamom bun. Sometimes we call them a cinnamon snail because it's snail shaped. No snails in it. It's all dough and sugar and cinnamon, and it tastes really great. And those are you can find everywhere. And they taste fantastic, and we locals probably eat way too many. We have to bike more to stay fit because we eat so many pastries. There are some select bakeries that are fantastic. Hot Baker is one. There are many others, but then generally you can go to any bakery or cafe, and you can find them, and they are usually the cafes team up with the local bakeries, and in some cases they even have their own baker. Local places will have good quality too. So Danish pastry, you have to eat it for around breakfast if you go to a bakery, because that's where they're the freshest and they will have the widest selection. And they can be up to 10 different types of pastries. Usually bakeries have a little less than that, maybe four to seven, depending on the time of day you come. I get them in the morning. A typical Danish breakfast can be fun, but we keep it simple for breakfast. So if you want a Danish pastry, you usually pair it with some bread. That could be rye bread, but the popular item right now in Copenhagen, which also, in my opinion, tastes amazing, is sourdough bun. Travelers to Copenhagen, they are amazed by the quality of the bread. And I notice as well as someone from Copenhagen, I find it tricky to go to some places outside Denmark because I expect a lot from the bread. Europe bread is very important, but some countries are better at making bread than others. And Denmark's really that category. Sourdough bun you get with butter and cheese. Normally, there are options for jam, for example, if you have problems with lactose. But Danish cheese is worth trying. It's a very salty cheese, very popular right now. Most local cafes will have it because if they don't have it, the locals will get angry at them. So they will literally lose money if they don't have this particular cheese. It's a
Okay.
Copenhagen. You can't get it outside of Copenhagen. It's called a BMO. You might see signs nowadays that will advertise you can come get your Danish pastry and your BMO. It's short for a bun with cheese. Bolle med ost is how it's called in Danish. Yeah, so that's what we call it in Copenhagen. It has its own term now. And you get that with coffee or tea. But there are a lot of the cafes and bakeries will also have a selection of healthy organic juices. So that's also something that could be nice to try with your breakfast if you're not a tea or coffee person. For lunch, yeah, you have to get the open face sandwich. Now be aware if for people who have gluten intolerance, it's a bit tricky because it's an open face sandwich consists of a piece of bread with some topping. There are restaurants nowadays that offer gluten-free bread, but this is something you have to plan a bit. You have to ask in advance, and not everyone does it. The food scene is becoming more accommodating of dietary restrictions or food allergy. It's not everywhere where they advertise it. They will try to accommodate people, but it depends on where you go. And be aware if you go to really traditional places that might not be able to accommodate you. So people with dietary restrictions have to do a bit more research and can't necessarily just go somewhere and get the food. Open face sandwich it's also not maybe the easiest thing to eat if you are a vegetarian or a vegan because it's traditional food, and traditional Northern European food usually contains a lot of meat and seafood and don't have so many vegan or vegetarian options. It is getting better. There's usually always something that you can get. So, for example, if you are vegetarian, I would recommend getting a open face sandwich with potatoes because it's very traditional, tastes good if you like potatoes, and you're still having the very traditional food. Then there are now usually some items for vegans as well, but be aware you will have a smaller selection. If you don't have dietary restrictions, knock yourself out. There are many options. Huge variety of open face sandwich. So you can get almost anything your heart desires, but still with a local tradition attached to it. A lot of meat and fish paired with sauces and herbs, and something that makes the whole thing into a very nice meal. Eat it with a knife and fork because otherwise it's gonna blow up in your face. It's too much food. There's too many items on the one little piece of bread, and you can get it everywhere in the city. So that's something that's very easy to find. A Danish hot dog is also traditionally Danish. Ironically, it's a hot dog. It doesn't sound very Danish. We've had it for the last century, so now we think it's ours. We have our own variety, and it's really good. It's usually the sausage is made from Danish pork meat, which is generally quite high quality, and you put special toppings on it, but some of them you can opt out of. For example, if you don't like onions, you can just ask. You get them from a traditional hot dog stand. Just tell the hot dog maker, okay, I don't want this on, I don't want this on. So they'll make it the way on the spot, they'll make it the way you want it. The hot dog is an item that it's our only traditional street food. So it's in all the big public places like the shopping street, like Nyhavn. City Hall Square has the two. So it's very easy to find. For those who have dietary restrictions, there are organic hot dog stands that also cater to people who, for example, don't eat pork meat, or if you're vegan or vegetarian, they have options for that too. So it's even a vegan sausage. So they have a more variety, and they are in a couple of places around the city center as well. So that's also an option, and it tastes really good. So that's something I would recommend. And otherwise, there are these seasonal specialties. For example, Christmas. We're starting Christmas season now, and Christmas season for Danes is usually a lot of Christmas beer. Beer is very big here. We are the home of Carlsberg, third largest beer company in the world. As they say themselves, probably the best beer in the world. I'm not sure. There are a lot of great beers. They're not the only one. But we have a very vibrant craft beer scene. So you can get amazing craft beer here from lots of local craft beer companies that are based in or near Copenhagen. So actually, if you venture if you're a bit more adventurous, if you like to go on beer adventure, in Copenhagen, you can actually find several local breweries that have brew pubs attached to it. So you can drink the beer on the location that it's made. The beer scene is really good. The staff at craft beer pubs are knowledgeable and help you find the right beer. You can ask for samples in most craft beer bars. In the winter, craft beer companies and Carlsberg make special Christmas beer that you can only get in the Christmas season. So that's very popular among locals. But the top Christmas things to try is the Scandinavian mulled wine. It's not just a Danish thing. You find it in other Nordic countries as well. We call it gløgg. It starts with a G. And in November and December, it's everywhere in Copenhagen. Very popular here. It's basically heated red wine, sometimes white wine, with almonds, raisins, and spices. Very strong. Definitely not for kids, but it's warms you up nice when it's warm weather. So it's part of our cozy culture. If you get it in a cafe or bar, sometimes they give you Danish Christmas butter cookies. Or traditionally, you eat it with a fluffy pastry like a pancake. I think it's called pancake balls in English. The Danish name is impossible to say if you're not Danish. It's called æbleskiver. I think if you see pancake balls, the vendors will know. They don't have it everywhere. It can be a little tricky to find, but I see more and more cafes in city center that now start to offer it. You eat it with strawberry jam and powdered sugar. So you dip the pastry into it and then eat it with your fingers or with a fork. So that's a very traditional thing to eat in Denmark. And then if you're here for Christmas and you want the Christmas food, then fried or oven fried pork belly with red cabbage and potatoes is a very traditional Danish Christmas meal. If you happen to come in other seasons, for example, if you come in February, I don't recommend visiting in February, but if you do, despite the weather being quite bad, there will be all the bakeries serve a staple type of pastry or bun with cream or jam inside, because we have a sort of annual carnival for kids. It's a bit like the French Mardi Gras. And that happens in February, and you eat a special bun with that you get from the bakeries.
Wow, okay.
But otherwise, the things like the Danish pastry, the open-faced sandwich, the hot dog, you can get year-round. And otherwise, it's focused on quality of the beer, quality of cocktails, drinking more healthy beverages. Most places will have a good selection of organic juices and lemonades made from Danish fruits and berries. Another special thing to try is a Danish porridge for breakfast. So oatmeal porridge is a very traditional thing to eat here in Denmark. And there is a local cafe chain that makes amazing oatmeal porridge. They are in the Torvehallerne food market that I mentioned earlier. And that would be, if you don't want bread for breakfast, want to eat something traditional, you go there and have their oatmeal porridge. You can decide yourself what you want, what toppings you want on the porridge, or you can have what they recommend, which is amazing. Get it with caramel sauce and almonds and apples, and it tastes really, really good. Otherwise, Danish food is mainly, traditionally, it's potatoes and cabbage, root vegetables, meat, fish. Restaurants today will try and experiment a bit with older food traditions and make it less heavy than Nordic food traditionally is, and actually they really bring out the taste in it. But the food scene is very dominated on meat and fish, but there are also more restaurants that try and find vegetarian options. So the restaurants will usually try and accommodate you, and you can usually get something quite nice depending on the restaurant that you go to.
All right. Okay, so a lot of options. I'd also like to know if there are any, besides the markets that you already mentioned, if there's any popular restaurants that you personally like when you're...
Yes, we have many restaurants and we keep getting new restaurants. One place I really like is called Poppel, P-O-P-L. It's fairly new, opened during COVID, and actually started because of COVID. It is the world famous restaurant Noma who decided to open a burger joint. Burgers are American style, but very popular in Denmark. We have lots of our own burger chains and restaurants above McDonald's in quality. The price are, but you get quality for the price. Popple is Noma's version of a burger restaurant. Good quality burger, and they also have vegan versions of it as well. And it's a very nice location in close to city center. The food markets that I mentioned before, Torvehallerne and Reffen, are really cool places and have great food options. Reffen is great if you want diverse food. So if you don't want to just eat Danish food, so it's very popular among locals. They have food from all over the world. And a lot of people who make it, they are from those places. Usually end up in Copenhagen for various reasons, and then they open their own places where they will make their own food. So Reffen is great for that. Otherwise, O starts with an A, which is located in several places around Copenhagen, and they serve traditional Danish food. And it's a place I like to go for lunch. They have amazing open face sandwiches. One of their best locations, especially if you want a nice view with your food, is the Royal Playhouse close to Nyhavn. The Copenhagen Opera House, also close to city center, right outside city center, on the other side of Copenhagen Harbor. The Copenhagen Opera House have a restaurant too, Almanac, and that is really nice food. It's Danish style food, but they mix it with other food traditions. Be aware that the Danish restaurant scene, the Danish food scene, there are some trends that most restaurants follow. So often the restaurants will have fixed meals where the chef decides what he or she thinks you should eat. And so if you have any dietary restrictions, you actually need to call the restaurant, write the restaurant in advance, and they can accommodate you with that because they have these set menus. Or they have few items for each course to reduce food waste, focus on quality. If you want a lot of options, you might have to look to find restaurants with and can accommodate that. And a lot of restaurants like an Almanac, they have small courses. So the dishes are quite small, so you need few courses to feel full, but you try different things, a tasting menu. The food quality is really good here. Local, not famous places offer nice dining. The food scene is pricey because of the quality of ingredients and skills of chefs. We have world-class chefs here in Copenhagen, so that of course affects the price. But even just going to a local cafe you will usually have some nice options there.
Yeah. Okay. I'd also like to know if there are any food delivery options that tourists can download on their phone and get free delivery, or get food delivery to their doorstep.
Yes, we actually have the two big ones. We have Bolt, WOLT. They have a lot of options, and Just Eat, international now from Denmark. So the country Just Eat. So they're very big here and have a lot of options. I think Bolt is a bit more high end with who they partner with, but Just Eat is in more district. Those are the options.
Okay. I also know sometimes maybe if a tourist is vegetarian or vegan, they might like to prepare their own food in an Airbnb. Are there any convenience stores in the city where they can buy snacks or other essentials they may need?
Yes. Be aware that in city center, their supermarkets, the convenience stores are a little far between. So they can be a little harder to find. They are there, but maybe not super close to the accommodation. But if you're living a bit outside the city center, then there's a lot of convenience stores. There are the places like Netto. We have Lidl too in Denmark. It's a German chain. We have Rema 1000. They're very affordable and usually have pretty good options. And then we have Foodtex, which if you, for example, you are vegan, then they will have good variety for you because they have a bit more variety in the stuff they sell. But the supermarkets are quite nice. They focus on offering organic food options and also to cater for people with, for example, gluten allergy or lactose intolerance or other dietary restrictions. Even the more basic supermarkets will usually have something. And because we're good at speaking English in Denmark, you can usually, all the packaging will be usually in Danish, but then you could usually try and ask the staff, and they will normally be able to speak English and can help you with what you need to know.
Okay, perfect. I also know that some countries drinking tap water is not exactly the right thing to do for tourists. So would you say Copenhagen is something like that? Like tourists have to get a water bottle from convenience store or
No, we have very good quality drinking water, and
Mhm.
most places you can drink out of the tap. Yeah, there are very few places where you can't do that, and then you usually mark it with a sign. So the only places where I might not want to get the tap water is if I go to a public restroom and they don't have the option to switch the water to cold.
Mm.
Don't drink hot water from the tap, but cold water is usually fine. If you're staying in a hotel or Airbnb, you can definitely drink the tap water. That's not a problem.
Okay, good to know. Also, is the restaurants in Denmark, I mean in Denmark in general, but Copenhagen as well, pet friendly because a lot of fur mamas go there with their pets.
Not necessarily. So this is where if you come with a dog, you should best to ask in advance, because that's not really something people do here. So it's best to ask the restaurant in advance if they can accommodate. It depends on the place whether they will allow it or not.
All right, so let's move on to another section. Sometimes, just as a travel distance, the weather, a tourist might fall sick. So, can you tell me what the healthcare facilities in Copenhagen is like for tourists?
So we have a pretty good public healthcare system.
Mhm.
If you are an EU citizen from another EU country, you get the same coverage as a Danish person, as long as you have an EU health card, international EU health card. So for other EU citizens, it's free of charge.
Nice.
Otherwise, you need travel insurance to cover it.
Mhm.
There is a general service travelers can use called 18. If you fall sick on a weekend or after the normal doctor's opening hours, like in the afternoon, in Copenhagen, you call that number, and staff will usually be able to help you even if you don't speak Danish. So 1813. Otherwise, there are some doctors that specifically cater to travelers. A company called Doctors in Denmark will specifically cater to travelers in Copenhagen. There are a lot of these services. I once had to help someone with emergency dental care, and I didn't know where to go, but a quick Google search found it. So there are these services you're usually located conveniently in city center, and they can usually take you on short notice. There's a 24-hour pharmacy close to the central station, because otherwise pharmacies close early. There's a 24-hour one you can always go to.
Okay, if a tourist needs a simple painkiller, maybe flu medicines, do they need a prescription for that, or they can just get it from the pharmacy?
Usually you need a prescription. Okay, and there are some types of medicine that you can get outside of Denmark, and especially if it's outside of Europe, that you can't get in Denmark. So if you have any special needs, you should bring that from your home country, because the laws about drugs and medicine in Denmark are actually very strict. For example, if you suffer for a common cold, there are many countries where you can buy over-the-counter drugs that will cure you quite fast, and you can't actually get those in Denmark. Regular stuff like painkillers, nose sprays, cough medicine, you can always buy over the counter. Stronger medicine, you need a prescription. Be certain it's something we sell in Denmark, and otherwise bring it from home to be on the safe side.
So earlier in the interview, you mentioned that you need to have data on your phone right from the airport. So can you tell me whether Copenhagen is it Wi-Fi friendly? Yeah.
It's quite Wi-Fi friendly. Most, pretty much all cafes, restaurants, museums, hotels, of course, will have Airbnbs. They will have Wi-Fi. There are even some public areas too that will have Wi-Fi. But Denmark is also very digital, so if you need public transport tickets, it's best to have data on your phone. If you have a phone plan from another EU country or the UK, it should work in Denmark and you not pay extra. But of course, always check with your phone provider first before you leave that they cover Denmark. If you're coming from outside of Europe, it would probably be best to have an eSIM or buy a SIM card. The most convenient thing would, of course, be buying it in the airport, where there are usually phone providers. And they normally offer you a good deal. So you don't have to worry about a big price difference between the airport or elsewhere in the city. The airport or the central station would be the easiest places to get those kind of things, or general things that travelers need. They will sell them at those places.
Perfect. Just to flow with that, when doing local transactions, do you recommend tourists using more cash or credit card?
I recommend credit card. Cards like Visa, MasterCard are accepted universally. It's actually easier to find a place where you can pay with credit card than a place where they will take cash. They usually take cash, but they might have a problem giving you back in the right amount if you come with big notes. And mostly they won't accept anything but Danish currency. Some places that will, in city center, that will accept euros. In rare cases, they will accept other currency, but euros is the one that is most accepted, but you will get a bad exchange rate. I normally don't recommend people paying in cash unless they have Danish cash. And if you're just here for a few days, you would normally never need it. There would be very few times where you cannot pay with credit card. One I can think of is if you take a bus and you didn't buy a travel card in advance. That's the only, I think, only time where you have to pay with Danish cash, Danish currency. Hotels, general stores, ticket machines, restaurants, they all accept credit cards and will usually prefer that. So we are moving towards a very cashless society, and it makes it very easy if you have international recognized credit cards.
Correct. As you did mention places with bad exchange rate. So in contrast, are there places in the city which offers the best exchange rate to tourists who want to use cash?
Yes, I normally go with Forex in Central Station, easy to find. There are also a few places in Copenhagen. They're internationally recognized and they give a pretty fair rate. That's better normally than taking cash from, there are some cash vending machines, ATMs around the city, and they don't always give you a very good exchange rate, especially in the city center. I wouldn't recommend those. But in Central Station, other currency exchange agencies, and they also give you a pretty good rate from what I've been told. I mainly use Forex myself, but I've heard they give you a good rate. Ideally, you wouldn't need much cash in Copenhagen. You'll be stuck with it because you can't use it outside of Denmark.
All right, let's move on to the next section. A lot of tourists, they love to buy souvenirs, unique items from different places that they go to. So in Copenhagen, what are some must-have souvenirs tourists should not miss?
So that's a little tricky because we have plenty of souvenir stores, but they're not really unique items. Because it can be fun to have a T-shirt that says Copenhagen, and you can get a little statuette of the little mermaid or a little figure of a royal family. You can get that too, and that can be fun to bring home. But more unique items, I would say, go to some of the local arts and crafts or design shops. So there's some design shops in city center near Tivoli where you can get design items which are good quality and is something very Danish. And then I would say edible souvenirs is what I recommend to get a taste of Denmark. You can get amazing items. They even sell them in the airport. If you forget during your trip and remember when you leave, then they have the really popular shops, specialty stores, they are in the airport as well. You can also get Danish design in the airport. So the airport's actually a good place for like last minute shopping, bringing something home from Denmark. Otherwise, you'll find them in the city center. There's some department stores that I mentioned before that has some specialty items. One I recommend is Magasin, which is actually close to the Nyhavn district. They have an area in the basement for local delicacies, chocolate, licorice, different items. So it's really good for anyone who has a sweet tooth and is something very uniquely Danish and good quality. They also have some design items because it's a whole department store. So they have lots of things. And they also have some Danish fashion items of different price ranges. So that's generally a good place to go for that. Otherwise, there are some, you can get a book from Denmark. A bookstore in central Copenhagen offers Danish literature in translation. That could be something quite unique because that's something that's quite undiscovered.
Yeah.
They have a little small selection. Of course, Hans Christian Andersen, but also lesser known authors.
Nice. All right. Are there also any shopping malls or outlet malls in Copenhagen for brand lovers?
So again, I would say the department stores or the main
Mhm.
shopping street, because Copenhagen doesn't, we don't really like shopping malls in Copenhagen. Honestly, I wouldn't recommend them to anyone. So I would recommend the department stores in central Copenhagen, especially Magasin, because it just has so many different items and have from especially Danish brands as well. You can find anything from cosmetics. They have the big international brands. Some stuff that I didn't know was famous until I brought some travelers there and they were looking for something very specific from a cosmetic brand that is not even Danish, and they had that in that department store. So the Magazine department store has a lot of items. And in the general shopping street has another department store which has more of the luxury items, luxury brands. And then you can find the general, among the Danish luxury brands, you can also find the international ones. Plus, in terms of, for example, Danish jewelry, besides Pandora, we also have some other brands that aren't renowned, maybe less famous, but are renowned, even the royal family, on the main shopping street. The main shopping street in central Copenhagen cater to your needs in that direction. And it's only if you need something a bit more out of the ordinary, a bit more special, and that's especially in terms of design items, less known fashion items, then you have to search a bit more within the city. Copenhagen shopping experience is more of a boutique experience.
Okay. Let's talk about safety. You mentioned Denmark was a safe country, but is Copenhagen also safe for solo and female travelers?
Yes, it's very safe. If you're traveling as a solo female, it's one of the safest places you can go. Of course, as anyone, take precautions if you're alone at night. I feel perfectly safe myself. Public transport runs the whole night. So you don't have to rely just taking a taxi. For example, if you're going out in the evening by yourself, you don't have to rely taking a taxi. You could take public transport as well. And it's very safe. So you don't have to worry. We have high gender equality in Denmark, and that kind of shows in our culture. And generally, Denmark is low on crime. So you have to look for the crime to like actively get involved in it, to be at risk. I would say the biggest risk is if you leave your bag unattended in a cafe near Nyhavn, there can be pickpocketers. If you go on a bike, secure your bag if you put it in the bike basket, because that can be an issue. Someone stealing the bag out of the bike basket. That has actually personally happened to me. It doesn't happen very often. So it's small things. And I would say even pickpocketing is not really a thing here. It's a small risk. But like any big city, if you look like a tourist, be aware of your surroundings, secure your items, worry because it's safe in general.
All right. I'd also like to ask, earlier you mentioned tourists need to get certain to their home country. So on that note, are there any medications or specific items, that is not allowed inside the country?
No, for medication, no. Unless some countries will start to use marijuana as a medication, but I think as long as you have a prescription for it, you should be fine, as long as it's in English. If it contains something that for most countries would be considered also an illegal drug, for marijuana, it's now many countries, it's been mixed. Denmark too, marijuana is illegal, but you can actually get medically prescribed marijuana. It's just not very common. As long as you're not bringing actually legal recreative drugs inside Denmark, you should be fine. There are more food items subject to EU restrictions, usually raw meat, eggs, and stuff you normally wouldn't travel with. It's good to check those rules if you plan to bring that. But otherwise, it's just general. It's the general stuff you're not allowed to bring into any countries that they will not allow on the plane. And besides from that, there aren't really any issues.
Perfect. Let's also talk about the climate. So, are there any best time to travel Copenhagen weather-wise? We know that February is not recommended.
The best time to come is summer, simply because it's the best chance of nice weather. It's warmer because we're in the Nordic climate, so it gets quite cold. And if you're not used to that, can be quite uncomfortable. It can rain a lot, even in summer. So the months from May to September are the nicest months to travel. December can be nice if you like the beautiful Christmas decorations. Go to Christmas markets. December is nice. We can still have nice weather from in the month of April and the month of October. This month of October actually had really amazing weather. And then, of course, there will be fewer crowds when you go outside the summer seasons. It will also be colder. Late September and October can be nice, but also very rainy, and you never know how it's going to turn out. Prepare for all eventualities. You don't need a big sweater in July unless you come from a hot climate and think that 15 to 20 degrees Celsius would be winter weather for you. And above the record, it's usually not 15 degrees in July, only if we have a bad day, which we can have, but it's usually hovering around 20, 25 degrees. Can be warmer than that. We can have hot days, chilly days, beautiful sunshine or rain. If you come outside of May to September, bring warm clothes. Be sure to wear, I always tell people to make sure to bring gloves, scarves, hats, because that's something people often forget. And you get surprisingly cold walking around even on a sunny day. It can feel colder than it is. So that's something to be aware of. No matter what time of year you go, prepare some rain gear just to be on the safe side. At least have an umbrella, good functioning umbrella. And be aware that no matter what time of year you go, it can be quite windy.
Yep. Okay. And how long would you recommend tourists plan their Copenhagen trip for?
I recommend a minimum of 2 days. 3 or 4 days, I think, hits the perfect spot where you also have time to go outside the city. Some people like to stay longer. I would say staying a week, consider more day trips. Copenhagen is nicely located, so you can actually visit a lot of places. Within a week, you could go out. You could actually go and stay in some other cities. You could go across country because the distances aren't very far. And if you're flying in and out of Copenhagen, you could see quite a few places, especially if you rent a car. So it depends on the general itinerary. A lot of people want to visit Copenhagen combined with other countries nearby, like Berlin or Amsterdam, or very popular to go to Sweden or Norway and just do a whole little Scandinavian round trip. So in that case, a couple of days in Copenhagen, then you really get to see the main highlights. There's always more to dive into, so it depends on how much time you put aside, how much you want to explore Denmark, and of course your budgets.
Are there any local or annual festivals or special events that happen in Copenhagen that you should not miss out on?
Not really. It depends on your interest. There's lots of things going on in summertime, and especially there's different music festivals. For example, if you're a jazz lover, the Copenhagen Jazz Festival in July, people to go dining weeks a couple times a year. So that could be fun to go to in late August or early September. We have local beer festivals and the Christmas markets. But if you want to go for the Christmas market, don't visit Copenhagen around Christmas Eve. Markets won't be open anymore. Some travelers who make that mistake. So go early in December. Yeah, so we don't really have any one big festival that I would say is a must-see attraction. There's rather lots of small ones that cater to specific interests. Some are more renowned internationally. People who love to party go for Distortion, usually end of May or early June. It's a big city festival in Copenhagen with street parties and music. Some come for Pride Week in mid-August. There's an opera festival in summer too. Or if you come in summertime and want a local festival, just to see what kind of festivals do we have. August is a great month to come because that's where there's a whole host, many different types of festivals. So there's usually something going on no matter week you come in August. Otherwise, late June. Definitely August for anything local.
All right. One last question before we wind up our session for today is that how common is tipping culture in Copenhagen? Are you expected to tip your wait staff or tour guide, for example?
So tipping is not a thing here. It's not part of our culture. Everyone gets a decent wage, even in the restaurant industry. So you're not expected to tip. Even if you go to some restaurants, if you pay with credit card, there will be a tipping option. And it doesn't mean that you are expected to tip. You have the option for it. And no one will think ill of you if you don't tip. Tipping is always appreciated. We're not going to be insulted if you tip any of us, even small tips. So it's the thought that counts. It's accepted, definitely, but there is no expectation.
All right. So today we extensively discussed Copenhagen and nearby places. We have a lot of insights thanks to you and your expertise of your city. It has been a lovely time speaking to you, and I'm sure this will inspire tourists to put Copenhagen on their list of cities to visit soon.
Well, it was a pleasure. I hope for all watching that could provide some inspiration. Maybe I'll see you next time in Copenhagen.
You'll see me if I have a planet trip. It's a short.
Yeah.
I'll be there. Thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you so much to all our viewers who watched this exciting episode. And we will be back with more other cities and travel inspirations. Stay tuned and thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.